It's a pleasure to welcome to the High Performance Podcast, Thomas Robson-Kanu, better known as Hal to those in the football world. Hal, nice to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Jake. A pleasure to be here with both you and Damien.
So let's get straight into it then. What is high performance?
What is high performance? For me, I think it's generalized as a broad topic. I think, high performance ultimately is being able to consistently perform or consistently apply yourself to whatever profession, whatever skill, whatever craft that may be. And that level of consistency will dictate, the level of performance that you offer. And I think whether you are working in an office, whether you're working at the top of elite sport, whether you're working an admin role, if you're able to apply yourself on a consistent basis, you're ultimately going to perform.
And the only way I think really to get to high performance is also with a healthy dose of honesty. So as we sit here today, do you believe that your approach to high performance helped you get the absolute most out of the talent that you were given as a footballer?
Yeah, definitely. I think when I was younger, I was taught about self-discipline and self-belief. And the first time I heard that, it really resonated with me. But as I've grown older, progressed, had more and more experiences, I've realized that, what is self-belief? It's like everyone tells you believe in yourself, but how do you believe in yourself? Where do you start? And I think it's actually stripping that back and understanding what yourself is actually the key. So, what are we at the end of the day? We're humans, beings living and experiencing, a physical life. And so I think the key for that is to understand what really motivates you, what you're very passionate about. And from there, being committed to exploring that journey, because at the end of the day, we're all on a journey. We're all experiencing various different experiences at various different times of our life. And I think making the most out of every single opportunity, out of every single moment is really, the biggest tool that I have learned, and I would, wish to pass on to anyone looking to progress in their life.
So would you tell us how you developed that tool, what that tool involves then, Hal? Because that's a fascinating answer, but I'd be interested in exploring the depth of how we can all learn to make the most out of each moment.
Yeah, no, that one's pretty deep, but we can try and go into it. I think so. As I was growing up, I read a book called Psycho-Cybernetics by one Maxwell Waltz, I believe is his name. I read it when I was 17, and it spoke about the direction of your thoughts and your emotions, which ultimately leads to then events within your life. So what that, it resonated with me definitely as a kid. But then as I began to experience success, failure, I began to analyze what I was thinking and what I was feeling at that moment in time. So as I said, as I began to dive deeper into it, began to think more about my emotions and my state of mind, you begin to realize that actually what you think determines what you feel. So the example is, if you wake up in the morning and you think, oh, I've got to go to work today, already you're experiencing a negative emotion, which then that negative emotion tends to then stimulate another negative thought. So you get locked in this cycle. So as I began, reading more and understanding more about, what I felt, because everyone wants to, everyone's on their own journey, and it is, is exploring and experiencing, something, whether or not they actually know they are. But I began to realize and began to pick up areas and topics of this around the world. And the biggest, the biggest thing which aligned to this was this concept and this scientific breakthrough, called epigenetics. And so I began really going into, epigenetics, and it talks about what you think determines what you feel, and what you feel then determines what you think. And ultimately that then dictates the state of your life. So that's when often, you'll always come across, people who always seem to be lucky, and then you'll always come across people who always seem to be unlucky. But if you drove deeper into what they actually think and what they feel on a consistent basis, you will see a pattern which replicates across any industry, across any age, and across ultimately, any culture. And I think really that is sort of how I've formed the basis of, how I try to live my life. And that's not saying, okay, well, you can wake up and always feel good about yourself, but actually acknowledging what you're thinking about and understanding what you're thinking about and why you're thinking about it, and then being able to then change or adjust that emotional state becomes a powerful tool. And ultimately, when you have, as I said, if you're driving down the motorway and someone cuts you up, of course, you're going to have that moment of reaction and say, what's he doing? But actually, if you can take yourself out of that state, what is called a refractionary period, if you can learn to have a short refractionary period, you then begin to live in a very, very different state, which then allows you to, ultimately, apply yourself in all situations as best as possible.
So one of our phrases that we frequently use on this series of the podcast, Hal, is success leaves clues. So when you were describing this epigenetics and understanding the emotions and the thoughts that lead to successful outcomes, would you describe what those thoughts and emotions are then that have been consistently present whenever success has followed for you?
Yeah, so I think, as I said, like living in that specific state it's not always easy, because you're going to experience adversity. Like life is not meant to be easy. Life is an experience, so we're here to experience that. But at the same time, how those experiences affect you determine the life that you're going to live. So in terms of the statement there, I think the clues is that when you live in a state of real understanding and real ultimately a positive emotional and mental state, you begin to live in a place of freedom. And so creativity never occurs when fear is present. So then you could then say that then what state were you in when you had those positive events or experiences in your life? You would say a state of creativity. And then what state were you in when you had those negative experiences and emotions? You would say that you were in a state of fear. So, and this is what, the original, concept and science behind epigenetics is. When you live in that state of creativity, and applying it to football, you play with freedom, you express yourself. And this is, the top players in the world who, number one, have all of the physical attributes, have all of the technical attributes, and then have the mental capacity. When they walk out onto the pitch, they play in a state of freedom, and they play in a state of creativity. Whereas when if you're going into a game, a great example is playoff final. Look at what's, the playoff final to get to the Premier League. Everything is riding on that. The club is going to get 180 odd million, for winning the game. Players' salaries are going to increase, double and triple. And so there's a lot riding on that. So that fear, based on what you're thinking, can then lead to a lower level of performance. Whereas if you just acknowledge that this is my journey, this is the experience that I have, and I'm going to live in that state and have the freedom to express myself, more often than not, you're going to have those positive experiences. So I think, hopefully that sort of answers your question.
It sounds to me how, like, in your own life, you're able to get there. What about as a footballer? Were you able to get there as a footballer? Did you reach that point, which I guess almost every professional footballer would love to get to, which is the ability to play on the biggest stage in the world with freedom?
100%. And I think, looking back to 2016, what we did like that with Wales and getting to the semi-finals of the European Championships, only to be knocked out by Cristiano Ronaldo, towering header at the back post, full of physical attributes, 20 years of discipline
and plenty of freedom, probably,
and plenty of freedom, because he doesn't care, he's going there, this is me, I'm gonna step into it, I'm gonna do what I do best. And I think that for myself was 100%, a massive pinnacle, not only in my career but in my life, because no one will know the setbacks that I went through, and we can touch on them today. But I was written off as a footballer. I was written off as a footballer at 14 and 15 because I was too small, and physically I wasn't going to be equipped to play at the professional level. I was then written off at 17, 18 after two cruciate knee ligament injuries, where the surgeon told my father that I would never play at the level that I thought I would, because of the physical debilitation that the injuries gave me. And so being able to come through that and still play at the very top of the game in the top leagues, in the top competitions in the world, for me was a massive success, and something which I'm immensely proud of. And I think, as I said, I was very aware very early on that this was my journey, and I was experiencing it, and I was open to continuing the journey.
So I want to go back and explore that journey that you've been on, but I can't leave that reference that you made to Wales just unasked, Hal, because one of our areas of real interest on this podcast is around culture, and you're describing a culture there of freedom where people felt liberated to be able to play without fear. I'm intrigued as to what were the ingredients that went into creating that culture of overperformance in many ways from that Wales 2016 team.
Yeah, I think looking back on that, it was a journey which ultimately stemmed for over a decade, because all of the squad which was there at Wales, within the Wales team at Euro 2016, we'd played with or against each other for nearly 10 years, whether it was youth, academy, reserve, first team football, Premier League football. And so we came together as a group, and I think the biggest moment was when Gary Speed took charge of the national team, and he came in and he instilled a culture of high performance. He began looking at the finer details. What were we eating? How were we preparing? What was our travel like? What was our analysis like of the opposition? How did we tactically set up? How could we affect the opposition at international level? And all of these individual elements, he brought that culture into the group and into the squad. And at that time, that moment in time, we had come off the back of a culture which was, we accept to lose. We're a small nation. We haven't got the best players in the world.
Did you feel that in the squad at that time?
The shift?
No. Did you feel the acceptance of losing in that squad before Gary Speed arrived?
100%.
Really?
Going away to Azerbaijan and losing 2-0 and being like, okay, well, this is international football, this must be the level that it is. I think there was that acceptance of the culture which had come before us. But
what had created that then? Because none of you get to professional footballers for Wales, and most of them playing in the Premier League or at least in the Championship, without a winning mindset.
Yeah, so no, this is not the players. All of the players who had come through, we're all winners. We'd all gone through our own challenges. Yeah. We'd all gone, look at Gareth Bale, what happened to him at Tottenham, being written off, however many games it was, 19 games, losses, the first 19 games he'd played, something, a crazy stat like that. And it was like, but everyone had overcome that. So it was a group of winners, but the culture that we came into as a group when we were at the camp wasn't a culture of high performance, winning mentality, being able to express yourself and believing that you can perform and compete at that level. And so
what were the signs and symbols of that, Hal? So when you went into the culture, what was it that you saw that smacked of mediocrity or just that acceptance of the level you were at?
Yeah, I think it was just it's you could say, an example, the cones, the setup of the cones, or the condition of the cones being put down, like the small details, the balls being prepared correctly, the training kit, did we have the right sizes, things like that. And this is not me saying okay, the kit staff weren't good, the coaches weren't good. No, it was just that those standards were just historically in place, where it wasn't seen that we're coming away to Wales to compete, to win, to perform. And so, as I said, Gary Speed coming in, he touched on every single aspect of the group, and ultimately that had a massive impact because we were all winners as individuals. So that pivotal, that influence, that leader, he was able to harness that within all of the players within the group, and ultimately that brought us together. And we went on a phenomenal run under Gary Speed, and God rest his soul, obviously he passed, and that again was a very, very difficult time. And that was the first time again for as a group, you said around that togetherness that we had in 2016, that stems all the way back from, those moments, because we all experienced that together. And that, ultimately brought us close together, because it made us realize at a footballing level, at an international level, that it's real, that life, that life and death, like as it's obviously extremely tragic. And when you experience that, it brings you together in a really strange way. But the reason it brings you together is because it heightens the sense of morality. So when you have a heightened sense of morality, you then have a heightened sense of empathy, you have a heightened sense of togetherness, you have a heightened sense of of self, of oneself. And so those elements again, as a group, made us a tight-knit group. And then we went through the experience of that over the period of time, the following years. And then Chris Coleman then coming in and having to deal with that difficulty of coming in on what was now deemed a success under Gary Speed, because he changed the mentality and the trajectory of the nation, because we were winning games, we were then competing at the level. And Chris Coleman took that mantle on and brought the group even closer together again. And ultimately, as I said, it was a culmination, which then led to the success of what we had as a nation.
So would you explain that what can sometimes as an external observer look like a paradox of, you spoke about playing with creativity, and as you go on and start to become more successful and you win games and expectation starts to ramp up, how do you maintain that and eradicate that fear that you spoke about that can often inhibit?
I think it's it's understanding what you're feeling, really. And I think that's what we began to do as a group, and as individuals. We had winners, we had world-class players, and it was really just about realizing that when we came into the group, there was the culture there, which had now been instilled by the likes of Gary Speed, taken on board by Chris Coleman. And then, the players were allowed to, there was no shame in being the best, or wanting to be the best, So I think before, if you look at a decade ago, or, before I made my debut, it would almost, the culture, if you came into that culture and was like, I'm the best player, let's go. We can beat these. It would almost have been like, well, no, we're Wales. And so I think like the culmination of the events and that growth as a group was the experience that we had.
I think it's really interesting that you say that, Hal, because I think people often make the mistake of thinking, doesn't matter about my culture. If I just hire winners to come into this business or the world that I'm in, we'll be fine. But this is a really, really clear example of hiring and bringing together a team of winners is one thing. A culture in which they can thrive is something totally separate and absolutely vital.
100%. And I think that's when you look at the managerial landscape today, you can see that visibly. You can see the teams that have success are the managers that give a platform to the players to thrive. And what actually that means is that these managers, they don't have an ego, but they also have a really strong belief, and that whether that's faith, whether that's religion, whatever it is, they have that sense of belief, and with no ego. It's not about them, it's not about me, it's about what can I do for the group. And then when you begin to break down businesses, when you begin to look at corporations, you can see the culture within them and how the mentality and the structure of the very top really does stem down all the way through the organization.
So what do you think a strong and powerful culture looks and feels like?
I would say a really strong and powerful culture is a culture which has no fear. So, and an example would be as small as, an intern coming into a new business and on the first day being told, hey, if you have any questions or if you have any thoughts, share them. You're not going to be shamed for saying it. You're not going to be, castigated because there's this, hierarchy where, you have to earn your rights or earn your, your position. So I would say the first thing is making sure that there's no fear just doesn't exist. The second one, I think, is having a real sense of empathy. So, and ultimately that stems from having a really high level of emotional intelligence. So, understanding why and how people might be feeling a specific way. And there's great examples and football players who have played under multiple managers will know the difference, because there's managers who come in and just have zero level of emotional intelligence. And so what very quickly happens is that you lose the group, you don't maintain any form of culture, and ultimately you create an environment which creates, isn't successful. Whereas when you have those managers who come in and create have that level of emotional intelligence and understanding around the players, and that's the thing, like, from the outset, it's like, it's almost seen as FIFA, that these people aren't real, but players are human beings, employees are human beings, and everyone has thoughts and everyone has feelings, and understanding that and allowing individuals to express themselves is what over time delivers results. And I think that's the that's the biggest thing in any environment and culture.
So in a culture then where you don't have a leader that has that empathy or that emotional intelligence and the understanding of having to eradicate fear, when you found yourself in dressing rooms like that, Hal, how do you protect yourself so that you can still perform at your best, even within what sounds like a toxic environment?
Yeah, I think it's in those instances, I think you firstly want to make sure that you stay true to yourself, and sometimes that may mean an element of conflict. You're not outwardly going out and saying I don't agree with what you're saying, but actually you just stay true to yourself in your own beliefs, and you don't let the external environment have an impact on yourself. And that's the biggest thing that I would say, for anyone listening, is that too often the culture that we have grown up in terms of society, schooling, education, working environment, we have subconsciously been taught to accept circumstances in our environment and let that dictate how we feel and how we think. And a great example of that is the news. why is the news always negative? It's always negative because it affects people. Negative information affects people more, and so that dopamine response triggers a semi-addiction, and therefore you watch it more. So, but actually you're not really taking into account of what taking on board that level of negative information has on you as an individual and you as a human being. And I think that is the biggest thing. So, when you're talking about a culture, toxic culture, like not letting that environment affect you as an individual and as a human. And then the second one is being, trying your best to impart, your being, if you are living in a different state or in a positive state, can you pass that on to your your peers, your colleagues, people around you, to try and ultimately affect positive change.
So let me ask you two hypotheticals then, if I can, because I appreciate what you're saying and I think it's incredibly powerful. But when you're in a football club and you oppose some of what the leader is asking you to do, or the way that they're conducting themselves, they have the ultimate deterrent in many ways. They either drop you from the team, they either banish you from the training ground, they either get rid of you at the end of a contract. So there are some very tangible punishments for daring to speak out or stand against it and be authentic to yourself. First of all, how do you cope with that then? And what advice would you give anyone?
Yeah. So the first thing that I would say is that nothing is ever final. So success is never final and failure is never final. So if you're banished or you're you want to stay somewhere, or you want to be involved, or you want to play and you don't play, that's just part of the journey. So the quicker you understand that and learn that and actually acknowledge that and live within that space, the more freedom and the higher level of living in terms of mental state you're going to be in, because actually you end up saying, well, no, look, I understand I'm on my own journey and I'm going to live and experience as much of it as possible, and and ultimately take each moment and each event in your stride.
And the second hypothetical then is that there's that horrible term that we often hear in football where somebody that dares to defy convention and do something different is often regarded as busy. How do you sort of stand and sort of try and influence positively and protect yourself against those critics that want you just to stay in your box and to be the conventional footballer they expect you to be?
Yeah. I think that's an old model of understanding, to be honest. And I think that whole busy shout was a really big one when I was coming through as an academy player. But I think it's still there, definitely. But I think actually you realize that being busy is actually doing the right thing, or doing, what's right for yourself. And when you're doing that, you're doing what's best for you. So in the long run, no one can tell you differently, because we've all had, I think any professional player will have played with hundreds of kids who wanted to have the dream and live their, become a footballer, but those kids most likely didn't apply the level of discipline or the level of commitment that you had to in order to get there. And the example is, when you leave school at 16, you go straight into a full-time working environment of training, 6-7 days a week, while your friends who you would have grown up at school are off to uni, off experiencing college, living that life. And so it's easy to get sucked into that and actually be, feel like you're missing out, FOMO, I'm missing out on that experience. Well, but actually, if you're true to your own desires and your own passion, then you don't waver. You have a laser focus, and sometimes you may not realize that at the time, and you may want to do it, but you choose not to. But in the long run, when you look back, you're like, wow, yeah, that was one of the reasons why I was able to achieve what I achieved.
Have you noticed a change in football, Hal? Because when we talk about you and your experience in cultures where there are not emotionally intelligent leaders, And then when I now look at leaders in the Premier League, recently Carlo Ancelotti was there. You speak to any player that played under him and they just say, oh, he just understood me. Pep Guardiola, we had Mauricio Pochettino on the podcast talking about universal energy. Jurgen Klopp, these managers, Thomas Tuchel, who look like the first thing they do is bring the group on the journey with them. I'm just really interested to hear from you how the culture of football as a whole has changed in the time in which you've been a professional.
Yeah, definitely. That's what it is. It's that, firstly, as I said, it's that level of emotional and social intelligence. So as I said, like, players are human beings. You can go into, as a manager, you can go into a club and you can say the perception of what a player is, right? So a high profile player on a massive salary, the perception of him in the media might be X. Previous comments or experiences with him, the opinions of that player may not be positive. But when you go into that club, if you understand that they are a human being and they're like that for a reason, they've had their own journey, they've gone on their own experiences. So my job as a manager is to harness and tap into that player and understand that player, which will ultimately allow me as a manager to get the best out of that player. But in order to do that, you have to, it's called the death of the ego, and I think that's something which, you talk about the likes of, Klopp, Pochettino, Ancelotti, like they've gone through these experiences where they understand themselves and then understand that, it's not about them. Like, who am I? I'm just a being. I'm a universal being living in this experiential life. So my name is not who I am, so I'm not Thomas Hal Robson-Kanu. I'm a being on my journey, just as, you Jake Humphrey, Damien Hughes, you're all going on your own journey. So when you acknowledge that, you then remove the ego from your life. And when you remove the ego from your life, when you see, you're a rubbish player, you're a rubbish presenter, you're a rubbish commentator, you actually look at it and go, that's actually more of a reflection of what you are than what I am. So I think that's the biggest thing, because to do that with players, you have to really understand yourself.
So did you end up in a position where you were desperate to change people's opinion of you, or does madness lie down that road? And actually, people will always have an opinion of Thomas Hal Robson-Kanu, and it might be brilliant player, scored the greatest goal our country's ever seen. It might be rubbish footballer, shouldn't have ever pulled on a jersey, but you can't control that. So how did you square that away on your own head? Did it just hold no credence for you?
Yeah, so it falls back into what I originally discussed, and that's not allowing your environment to affect how you think and how you feel. If you can do that, you completely live in a different state than any other state you will have ever lived in your life, because it doesn't matter what they say, because that's my environment. That's not me. That's not how I feel. That's not what I think. And so that really is the key. And it's fascinating to see, because I remember as a 20-year-old at Reading, when Brendan Rodgers came in as manager. He'd just come from Watford. He was a highly esteemed coach, had left Chelsea's academy to take the role. And he sat everyone down and he said in a meeting, he was like, I want everyone to visualize themselves walking out in one of the top competitions, whether it be the Champions League, whether it be a major international tournament, and you stepping into that moment and into that that moment in your life and living it and feeling it. And how did that make you feel? He didn't go into epigenetics. He didn't talk about the environment affecting you. But what he was talking about there was actually living in a higher state, a higher realm of thought, which then affect emotion. So then that cycle then is what you can then drive and create consistently positive things in your life. And so that can be applied to absolutely anything, but you have to understand it's a process, and you have to understand that actually I'm just going to, that's the state and the being that I'm going to live in. So I remember at the time, there were boys in there who were would then be looking around and being like, what's this guy on? And,
I was going to say, it's 12 years ago. I imagine the football was very different then.
Definitely. And there were senior pros in the room at the time. It was great. And Brendan Rodgers, Champions League manager, one of the clubs, one of the greatest clubs in the world he's managed, and the success that he continues to have. And so I think when you look at any level of high performance or, real success, I think you can see that model in there. But I think the gap is understanding what that actually means. Because again, that's just all experiences. That doesn't define you. So now, if we take, Brendan Rodgers as an example, he's had a phenomenal career. He's going to continue to have a phenomenal career, but it's important that he doesn't then identify with that experience, and he actually continues to live in his own being and his own state and where his true passion is. So, yeah.
So brilliant. But you said that Brendan Rodgers was having that conversation with you as a 20-year-old, but you also described that you were exploring epigenetics at 17. So you were ready for those messages and could anticipate them. What was it that had ignited your curiosity into this deeper realm of understanding?
Yeah, I've always had an active mind, and I think at school I found school really, really easy. I just did, I was, I would say, I was a cheeky child. I would always get, top grades in my school, but then I didn't really have to work too hard at it. And so, growing up, as I went into football, it was like, okay, yeah, physically this is demanding, but actually you had so much mental space, which then begins to fill with thoughts. Because then as a 15-year-old, I suffer my first cruciate knee ligament injury, out of the game for 12 months, come back, second knee cruciate ligament injury on the same knee, have to have surgery again. At that time, the likes of Theo Walcott, who I was, playing against as a kid in the academies with Southampton, he gets a move to Arsenal for, 15 million. And I remember lying in the hospital bed after surgery, and he had just, moved. He had just done a transfer. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm in this hospital bed, and Theo Walcott's just moved to Arsenal for however many million. And so these thoughts and feelings, I began to I was wondering why was I experiencing them? What was it about it? And then as I began to come back, I went through the adversity. I went through obviously began using the range, which we can discuss with the Turmeric Co, the shots, which ultimately changed my life from a nutritional perspective and a health perspective. But then coming back from that, and then understanding, playing in a reserve game and feeling nervous. I was like, why am I feeling nervous? Why am I feeling nervous? What is that? And then, so it was trying to understand that, which then led me, to understanding around reading, psychocybernetics, and what it was talking about. And what I took from that was that it's just how I'm perceiving it. So those feelings aren't nerves. It's actually excitement, but it's only how I perceive those feelings. So I was perceiving it previously as nerves, but then once I read the book and began thinking more about it, I switched that in my head, and I began saying, well, when I feel nervous, or when I feel that feeling of what I thought was nervous, that's actually excitement, because I have an opportunity to achieve something that I really want to achieve, i.e. scoring goals, playing really well in the game, being the best player, or achieving my dream of becoming a professional footballer. And so I applied that model, and ultimately, I began to see patterns. And that's not me saying I've gone on my own journey. It's not always smooth sailing. You go through the roughs and you go through the ups and downs. And coming back as then a 20-year-old, I had, multiple hamstring injuries because, physically I'd lost 2.5 years of development because of my, the surgeries that I had, but I would always recover really quickly from them because, of my nutrition. I was taking, anti-inflammatory, natural products, which ultimately allowed me to get back onto the pitch as quickly as possible, and allowed me to then condition myself to ultimately have a career in football.
I love that thought process of the fact that nerves and excitement are basically the same thing, but we just chew. If you actually think about what the feeling is like, the feeling is the same, isn't it? Like you're about to go on a plane on a holiday, you feel a bit funny, but you decide it's excitement. You're about to go onto a football pitch or onto a TV show, you feel exactly the same, but you decide it's nerves and it impacts your performance. Before we talk about the nutrition, and I do want to get into that, just a few sort of key things from me when it comes to epigenetics. How do you begin the journey? Because there will be people listening to this who feel that a change is needed, and this could be the change that makes the difference for them. How do you begin to alter the way your thought processes work? Because we get a lot of messages from a lot of people telling us that the way their brain works has been hardwired by their parents as young children. This is not an easy thing to unpick.
That's interesting that you say that, because we're all a product of our environment at the end of the day. So we come through that, but that does not then define your future. So I think acknowledging that as the first instance is key. The second one is, we live in the information age. Because of the advancements in technology, the amount of information that we have access to, I've got 3 kids, they fully know how to operate an iPad. My 2-year-old knows how to unlock her, an iPad and access YouTube Kids. And so the information that we have available to us is, obviously a gift, but at the same time, if not used correctly, could potentially, be harmful, could potentially be a curse. And I think what that means is that really you have to, firstly go within. So it's understanding, what is it that you really want? What really motivates you? Do you want to become a career professional? And career professionals, phenomenal. These guys work relentlessly, are able to, consistently deliver in what they're doing, or do you want to be, a creative, an artist, an explorer, a traveler? What is it that you want? When you begin to understand that and really understand what what your heart truly desires, I think then that's when you want to begin to look into, how do I create that in my life? And I think, from my perspective, I've been fortunate enough to have, accessed some really, phenomenal information in the form of, whether it's lecturers, whether it's thought leaders. But in terms of, epigenetics, I would say there's no one better in this space than Joe Dispenza. And I would, very much encourage, and, he's got several books, and, if you're not a reader, then you can watch, YouTube videos, but really diving into epigenetics as a philosophy and how you can apply that to your life in the smallest of ways. And it's like, when on the outset, it's like, okay, you want to feel, the test is, I want you to feel positive from when you wake up in the morning, when you go to sleep at night. So when you step out of that door first thing in the morning on the way to, whatever it is, work, college, uni, training, whatever it is, be thinking and feeling a positive emotion, right? And a positive thought. And that positive thought could be as simple as, I'm going to have a great day today. I'm having a great day today. And it's like, okay, so my challenge to you is, do that. And when I want you to think and really feel and acknowledge when you step outside of that, because I can guarantee for most people that will be gone within 5 minutes, because they'll remember a bill to pay. They'll remember the weather isn't so great. It's raining in London today. It's the middle of summer. Oh, what a rubbish time, that's negative. Like, how can you really be in that positive emotional state? And I think, so back to your question, I think it's really understanding first what you truly want, what truly motivates you, and what you truly care about, and then understanding that the emotional state and the thoughts that you think, and not allowing your environment to impact that, will dictate how quickly and how successfully you achieve it.
So Robert Page either calls you or texts you or speaks to you in person, I don't know how it happened, and says, listen, Hal, a few goals at the end of the Premier League season, wonderful, you're not going to play for Wales at the Euros. How quickly did you turn what I imagine was a painful negative into a positive emotion, and how did you do it, and did you do it?
100%. I think Robert Page, he, when you break it down, he had the success of the group already. So I wasn't involved in that group that got them into the Euros. Obviously I'd had a phenomenal career, particularly at international level, playing in the Premier League. Of course, I believe in myself that I'm a top player. I've played at the top level. It's not easy to do that day in, day out, week in, week out, year in, year out. So, and of course I would have loved to have been there, but actually, when you break it down, he was, his backroom staff, I think the emphasis is on the group. And I think ultimately the decision was made, long before, the announcement was actually, released. And for me, it was like, yeah, cool, let's go do it again. That's my thought. And now from my perspective, it was being able to firstly experience a Euros from the outset, because we hadn't experienced one beforehand as a nation. So now actually being able to support the team and actually enjoy and actually live it as a fan and as a supporter was something which I was extremely looking forward to. And secondly, it was about, summer. I've not spent summer with my kids since I've been alive, so since they've been born. And so I'm extremely grateful that I've got the time off where I can not only alongside the businesses that I run, but actually being able to spend quality and valuable time in summer, which for most footballers you don't really get.
Brilliant. Well done for doing that, by the way. I mean, that's not an easy thing, is it, to do that? But I guess, there's no point you coming on here extolling the virtues of epigenetics and then being peed off all summer because you never made the Euro squad, right? I mean, that is your belief in action right there, isn't it?
Definitely.
Impressive. So should we talk about nutrition, Damien? Something you and I are hot on.
Yeah, well, again, it's fascinating because I think that you've touched on some of the remedies, Hal, that you were using from a very young age when you had these cruciate injuries. The bit that really intrigues me is, how was that perceived within a traditional industry like football, that you're daring to go outside of those lines and explore something different?
Yeah, first, before we go into that, I think it's fascinating. I don't know if you guys, well, I'm sure you have seen, the whole stir that the likes of Cristiano Ronaldo and Paul Pogba have caused for moving Coca-Cola bottles from the press conference and then saying, drink water.
But isn't that a sign of how the game is changing? Footballers having a voice and an opinion.
100%. And this is something which, myself, I'm extremely passionate about. And now I'm able to, really live that passion and drive that passion through the Turmeric Co, the business which I'm the founder of. But it's incredible because you look at sports, you look at society, and you look at the dis-ease that we have in society today. There's never been more obesity. There's never been more ill health. And yet we are, we've never had more information and knowledge that we do today, on face value. So how can we have such a high level of disease and ill health at this present moment in time throughout society? It just doesn't make sense. But when you begin to break it down, you look at sports and you look at fast food, high sugar, high fat companies and the influence that they have in terms of the global social, economical arena from a marketing perspective. McDonald's sponsor children's sport in the UK, children's football, and Coca-Cola is the main sponsor of the Euros and World Cup. Now, I don't give my child you physically can't give your child Coca-Cola as a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 year old. Truly, I remember when I first had my first Dr. Pepper, I think I was 7, and I bounced off the walls for nearly 5 hours, broke a window, and had the biggest crash ever. It was like, and so the influence that these brands and these conglomerates have on sport, from my perspective, needs to change, because they're treats at the end of the day. That's not saying you don't have them, and 100% everyone likes a treat, everyone likes a takeaway, but it has to be done in moderation. But sports organizations, clubs, and the likes of FIFA, they have to begin to take some responsibility in terms of the influence that they have on society. Because if you're living an everyday life, living with an everyday family which you love, when your child turns on England v Scotland and they see Coca-Cola plastered around the stadium, that subliminal messaging is having an impact on their consumer patterns, wants, and needs. And so that's marketing at the end of the day. And I think UEFA have just come out and they've said, if players continue to move the bottles, the Coca-Cola bottles, sanctions and fines will be actioned. And for me, that stems that the root of the issue and the cause of the issue lies, ultimately at the top. And I think it's fascinating to see, because these players are beginning to understand more and more about nutrition, and we'll touch on it and the impact that, what we're doing, through our brand, and what other, functional, natural health products are having on everyday people, but also on elite athletes. So I just wanted to touch on that, because I thought it's fascinating to see the impact that's having on, around the world at the minute. But yeah, so
the way your business is going, mate, we might see Turmeric Co on those platforms before too long. Because I was looking at the numbers. I mean, you've created a really successful business, and we have lots of entrepreneurs that listen to this. I would love to ask you to sort of delve into how you've gone from having an idea, and I know it came about from your family, but how you turn a nice idea into a successful business. A lot of people have nice ideas, not many people have successful businesses.
Yeah, I think it's again, it stems from passion, because I experienced it firsthand, and the impact that our products within the Turmeric Co had on my life in terms of recovery, reducing the inflammation in my knee, and allowing me to have the career that I've had. They became my secret weapon from a physical perspective and from a recovery perspective, and long story short, I suffered 2.5 years of injuries, came back from 2 surgeries, and I had constant inflammation and swelling in my knee. I then began getting, prescribed, standard medication, which, standard at the time. Again, this is 15 years ago, and I was popping these like Smarties, provided by the club doctor at the time. And my body just started having adverse effects to them. So I started passing blood in my urine. I couldn't sleep. I'd have nausea whenever I ate. And so I was stuck between a rock and a hard place, because I literally couldn't play without pain or restriction or swelling. But then I had to stop taking this medication, which was only really taking the edge off of the symptoms that I was experiencing. So I remember it as light as day. Came back, 17-year-old, really struggling with training. Reading were desperate for me to break through, because they knew I could. I was one of their top young players, so they were pushing me towards the first team. So they put me into a reserve game, and my body just wasn't ready for it. Anyway, I managed to get through the reserve game. Got home, and I remember my dad, used to drive me everywhere, so he'd drop me off, and he came in. And I went to walk up the stairs, and I literally couldn't, because of the pain in my knee. And I stopped, crouched over on the stair and just began crying, broke down completely. And I was like to my dad, there must be a way that I can, recover from this. There must be a natural way, a solution to it. And so at that moment in time, we just basically, made a pact. It was like, there must be something out there. So we just went on a research binge, began looking, went to the library, began looking at natural medication, natural recovery, natural ingredients that would treat pain, inflammation, and began coming across all of these ingredients. So the likes of pomegranate, watermelon, pineapple, ginger, and then subsequently turmeric. And so all of the information that we were looking at, there was, a herb and spices, Chinese, Eastern medicine book, and it, listed all of these ingredients along with black pepper, alligator pepper, all of these things. And it was like, okay, well, so we got all of them over the course of, a week. As a kid, I was really fussy, so I didn't like, anything that didn't taste untoward. And I had grown up on a diet of chicken, beans, and pasta as a young athlete. So I was nutrient deficient in terms of having functional, natural compounds, which would, otherwise support vitamins, other minerals, and other ingredients and compounds such as, curcumin, gingerol, etc. I had never experienced these in my diet. And so after a week, my dad had created this blend of all of the ingredients natural, from the raw roots, from the raw flesh, and began, trying it. Was like, no, that doesn't taste right. Need to make it. So after another week.
What was your dad's background, Hal? Sorry, if you don't mind me interrupting.
What
was your dad's background?
My dad's background, he was a civil servant, but my dad came from Nigeria and studied in the UK. And in Nigeria, his father passed away in the Biafran War, but his father was actually a herbologist in Nigeria in their village. And so my dad said he remembered people coming to their place, his father going into the forest, coming back with these natural herbs, natural leaves, and him actually treating them for things like sciatica, things, really random, conditions, but all natural. And so, so eventually he created this blend, which was at the time, a golden elixir in a small glass glass. And the first time I had it, it knocked me off my socks. I was like, whoa, never had anything like that in my life. And it was like, okay, that is quite potent. It's quite strong. I'll just commit to it. After a few weeks of having them, a couple a day, I began noticing that I didn't have as much restriction during training. Was like, okay, this is interesting. Like, okay, cool. Just stuck to it. After 6 weeks, I remember waking up, going into the shower, my usual routine. And in the shower, it was only then that I realized that was the first time in over 2.5 years that I had woken up without pain in my knee. And so that moment was a light bulb moment in terms of nutrition, health, and well-being, because the doctor had told me that I would never play without health and restriction again. The surgeon told me that I would never play at a level that, I could, truly freely play at. And the physios were prescribing me with, standard medication. And that was the only solution. So it completely shifted my mindset and my approach to nutrition. And so since that moment, I've had these turmeric shots every single day of my life, and they began to become my secret weapon, because as I got back into playing, a year later, I made my first team debut. A year after that, I made my international debut. A year after that, I made my Premier League debut. And I began noticing that I would recover quicker than my teammates. They'd have stiffness, aches and pains. I wouldn't get run down as easy. And I attributed it to the shots, but then my teammates would be like, what is that? What are you having? And I'll be like, oh, it's just a, turmeric shot. They'd be like, oh, can I try some? Would give it to them. They'd come in the next day. What was that? That was like, I quite liked it. I quite enjoyed it. And so as I said, up until that point, 2016, it was the latter part of 2016 where I then walked into Harrods and I saw a turmeric shot on the shelf in Harrods. Being the, footballer, bought the majority of the shelf, took them home, was like, this is phenomenal, because anyone who uses natural turmeric as a root in their diet will know that it's a very, very hard root to handle. It stains utensils, it ruins blenders, it doesn't taste great. So seeing this shot on the shelf where over the last decade, we had ruined over 100 blenders trying to make this, these shots on a daily basis. It was amazing to see. So took it back, to my family with my dad, and we went to drink it and we spat it out. I couldn't believe how inferior it was to what we were creating. Spun the bottle round, looked at the ingredients: 98% apple juice, turmeric powder, no form of bioavailable or absorbable ingredients, no, supporting fat soluble oils, which help with the digestion and the impact that the ingredient has on the body. So it was at that moment where we were like, you know what, we have to bring what we are producing at home on a daily basis to people in all different walks of life. And that stemmed a 2-year journey of building a bespoke production facility, building a team, building a brand. And we launched the Turmeric Co in 2018. And, you know, within a few months, we were supplying the likes of England Rugby national team. We were supplying, you know, the likes of Whole Foods Markets, Planet Organic. And we built the business as what you would call as a digitally native vertical brand. So it was all around that online consumer experience. You know, you order, you receive it, subscription model, as convenient as possible. And that's what we've achieved. You know, we've achieved natural functional health in a convenient way. And that ultimately is what is the reason that we're seeing the success that we're experiencing today. But for me, this is very much just the start of the journey. And I feel, you know, as a business and as a brand and as, you know, a product, there's still so much education, so much awareness that we have to do. And we're looking forward to it.
So you describe... No, go on.
No, you go.
I was going to say then, so when Jake was asking you about the epigenetics, and one of the things that you said was you start with a sense of a motivation. What do I want to get from it? So what's your motivation behind the obvious passion you have for this business?
Yeah, the motivation is that I want as many people in the world to experience what I experienced from natural nutrition, because the norm, you know, what we've been conditioned into believing around, you know, whether it's medicine, whether it's fast foods, something has to change. And for me, that's the biggest passion that I have, because I know the impact that it had on me, and I know the impact that it will have on so many other people around the world. And today, you know, we've got tens of thousands of positive customer reviews who have used the product on a daily basis over a period of time, and that product has changed their life. You know, I'm linked into all of the comms. You know, I'm CEO of the business. You know, we've got a team of 30, you know, stemming from production through to brand, through to sales, through to marketing and digital. And so it's a passion of mine, because I see on a daily basis, firstly, the effort that we put in terms of delivering the highest quality product on the market. And bearing in mind, there are products in Waitrose, Sainsbury's, you know, or, you know, Costa Coffee, Pret, they've all got these shots. They're 99% apple juice. That's not a turmeric shot. That's an apple juice shot. You know, so you're not getting the function and the actual value that you would be looking for if you were going to consume this. So we're just obviously so passionate about bringing what we know to be, you know, the best shot in the world, the best, you know, natural functional turmeric shot to people in all different walks of life. And so, as I said, you know, I'm linked into all comms. I see every single review. I see every single bit of feedback, and that really motivates me and motivates the team, because we know we're ultimately making a difference.
It's great, man. Do you believe in manifestations? I imagine you probably do.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one with manifestations, because it's like, you know, it's like saying, I want to be happy, I want to be happy, I want to be happy, I want to be happy. So it's like, okay, you want to be happy, but actually, how do you become happy? You know, you can want something so much, but you have to really feel it and experience it within your, you know, within your mind, within your psyche, and for it to become part of your being before it actually becomes. So for us now, you know, it's very much the start of the journey, but I'm visualizing and experiencing, you know, what it's, you know, this, you know, what we're doing can have an impact on hundreds of millions of people. Yeah. And so that's the state that you live in. And that's where ultimately, you know, I think that's what manifestation is, as opposed to just saying, you know, I want a gold Lamborghini. I want a gold Lamborghini. Yeah, well, what's the gold? You know, what's the, you know, no, you don't need that. You know, just, you know.
The reason I ask is because I do believe in it, and I've seen incidences in my own life where I've wanted a certain thing to be achieved so badly. I think it's happened. I believe this podcast came about because of manifestation, but I wondered if you were to what you would love to achieve with the Turmeric Co. What do you think where is the end goal? Maybe there isn't one. We talk on this podcast about infinite purpose. Maybe the purpose is infinite for this.
Yeah, I think goals are really interesting, because, and particularly, you know, going through the challenges and the adversity that I've had, you know, I was growing up a goal setter, but then it was like, what happens when you reach that goal? I'll get a new one. Okay. What happens when you reach that goal? I'll get a new one. And so really it's like actually acknowledging that it's not a destination, it's a journey. And so it's like, yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that I can say to anyone. So for me, like I know the impact that what we're doing, not only now in, the Turmeric Co shots and the impact that it's going to have, but as we begin to expand the range, as we begin to, have this core of natural nutrition through everything that we do, and we educate people and individuals and families about the impact that having a nutritious lifestyle and a nutritious diet can have on your health and well-being, not only your physical, but mental state. I think that knowing that and understanding that and living that is ultimately that's the goal. So it's like, where does that take us? Well, that takes us on a journey. It's not, there's no destination to it. And it's like, that's as sort of simple, that's all I can say. Yeah.
Very interesting. It's been a great conversation, Hal, and I think it's gone places that I don't think Damien and I were expecting. And I certainly think that people listening to this podcast won't be expecting the conversation to be like this. And that's what, in some ways, like, it's great that we surprise people by talking like this. But there's also an element of me that feels it's a shame that you spend an entire career as a footballer only seen through the lenses of a footballer by 99% of people at home. They make their minds up and they judge you as a person entirely on the performances you give on the football field. And that might be 60 seconds at the end of a game coming on as a substitute. And that, I don't know whether that frustrates you or not, but I do think it's a shame, because I think, you clearly have so much to share, so much to give.
Yeah, I think it's just, it is what it is. I think, it's, of course, I'm fortunate enough, like you said, manifestation, the creation, you lived in a creative state, you trusted in yourself to allow yourself to create, a podcast, which has then allowed me the platform to share, a portion of my experience. And so that ultimately is value add. So that's ultimately what we're here to do. We're here to give as much value through our experiences as possible.
Brilliant. We always finish our podcasts, Thomas, with quickfire questions. And the first one is, what are the 3 non-negotiable behaviors that you and the people around you have to buy into?
Yeah. So non-negotiable behaviors. So live in a state of empathy, live in a state of passion, and live in a state of creativity with no fear. So I'd say, those are the 3 key ones for me.
Love that. What advice would you give to a teenage Hal just starting out?
I would just say, enjoy every minute of it. I think looking back, I think I've experienced what I've experienced, and I've gone through the pain that I've gone through and the struggle that I've gone through. And ultimately that has formed who I am today, and, ultimately what I'll be tomorrow. So it's really, it's, all I can say is just, that enjoy the process and, ultimately trust in the process. I think that's the biggest thing, because when you face adversity, it's so hard to see through, to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but actually like just, acknowledging where you are and, allowing yourself to the freedom and the, the freedom to feel and think in a positive, progressive manner, I think is the biggest thing that you can do. And I think really my experiences have led me towards that. So if I could learn that sooner, then of course, great. But actually, maybe if I'd learned that, I wouldn't be where I am so it's,
Sure.
What's your biggest strength and what's your greatest weakness?
Biggest strength is biggest strength. I think, just that level of, I would say I'm quite disciplined, and that's, not disciplined to, oh, I'm really strict, bedtime, I'm not military sergeant, like, where I need to wake up at 6 a.m. and I need to, but I understand what I need to do to get to where I want to get to or experience what I want to experience. So I think having that discipline to, you know, to trust in, as I said, trust in the process, I think is a really, really strong, you know, strong strength of, you know.
What about your weakness?
Weakness, I would say, I think, again, I'd probably say it's that passion and that hunger. I think, you know, it's, you know, it's not, you know, it can be intense sometimes, you know, and it's, you know, and intense for me, but it's like something which I really enjoy. But, you know, I think sometimes you can look and you can think, you know, you could, you know, go on a beach somewhere and just, you know, chill out and put your feet up and, but I just can't. So I'd say, like, you know, that's sort of my passion is probably, you know, my biggest weakness.
What's one book recommendation you'd make for our listeners?
One book recommendation. I wouldn't recommend one book, but I would recommend every single one of Joe Dispenza's books. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Okay. And your final message, I guess, for the people listening and watching this, your one golden rule for a high performance life.
Yeah, I would say, high performance. I think I'd say it's just trusting in that process. There's you can't it's so hard to dissect it because you can't have one without the other. And so, you know, really trusting in that process and trusting in your belief and what you want to achieve is ultimately what's going to, you know, deliver whatever your passion and your ambitions are. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Listen, thank you so much for joining us. I think the very fact that we're sitting here talking to you should be a negative for you because it means you're not involved with Wales at the Euros. But the conversation we've had, and when you talk about how you dealt with that news and the way you deal with anything in your life, is you are the perfect example of how we all, if we have a positive outlook on life, can live the life that we want. So thank you so much for coming on here and being so open and sharing so much with us.
Thank you very much for having me, guys. And a pleasure to be on here. It's a phenomenal podcast, and a pleasure to share part of my journey.
Please hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, give us a thumbs up, leave a review, but somehow get involved with the High Performance Podcast and become part of our growing community. Thanks for being part of the adventure.